The flight home was a day early. No grand return, no triumphant fanfare. Just the simple, aching need for the familiar, the soft groan of the floorboards in the hallway, the specific way the afternoon light fell across the living room rug, and the woman he had built his life around. But life has a cruel habit of revealing its truths in the most brutal, unscripted moments. What Leo Vance witnessed when he crossed that threshold didn't just end his marriage. It systematically dismantled every foundational truth he thought he knew. And it all began not with a scream, but with a profound, echoing silence. A key that no longer turned smoothly in the lock. That was the first anomaly. The second was the nurse, a woman with a face like a pleasant mask, who handed him his discharge papers with a smile that never reached her eyes. "You're all set, Mr. Vance. Doctor signed off early. Your recovery is ahead of schedule." Leo offered a faint, weary nod. The dull, persistent throb beneath the fresh bandages on his chest was a stark reminder that ahead of schedule did not mean whole. 3 nights in a sterile hospital bed, listening to the rhythmic sigh of the heart monitor, watching the fluorescent lights flicker and hum on the ceiling. 3 nights without a single visit from his wife, Cassandra Cass Reed. She had texted once, "Hospitals give me the worst anxiety, my love. The smell of antiseptic, I just can't. I'll see you when you're home." The excuse was flimsy, but it wasn't the excuse that carved a hollow space inside him. It was the silence that followed. The empty hours where love should have been a tangible presence, a hand to hold, a voice to anchor him, and yet was utterly, completely absent. He told himself not to spiral. Cass was sensitive, easily overwhelmed. Maybe she just didn't know how to handle seeing him vulnerable. But somewhere deep beneath the layers of gauze and sutures, a part of him, a fundamental thread of trust, had already begun to quietly unravel. The cab ride home was a study in contrasts. The city outside the window was a frantic, blurry montage of life rushing forward, but inside the car, Leo's thoughts were slow, syrupy, and heavy with dread. He mentally traced the patterns of their life together, the way the morning sun would hit the marble countertops in their kitchen, the faint, expensive scent of Cass's jasmine perfume that always lingered on the velvet throw pillows in the den, and the profound, simple comfort of their king-sized bed. He wondered if she'd be surprised to see him. Maybe her face would light up with that radiant smile he'd fallen for. Maybe she'd cry with relief, her carefully applied mascara leaving delicate black tracks down her cheeks. As the taxi turned onto their tree-lined street, that gentle fantasy began to fissure. Cass's sleek silver Audi was already in the driveway, but it wasn't parked with its usual fastidious precision, nestled neatly beside his own SUV. It was slung across the brick pavers at a haphazard angle, the driver's door slightly ajar, as if she'd thrown it into park mid-motion and sprinted for the house without a backward glance. That wasn't her. Cass prided herself on control, on appearances, on a curated perfection that extended to every detail of her life. A cold, leaden weight settled in Leo's gut, a sensation entirely separate from the surgical pain in his chest. He paid the driver, hoisted his small overnight bag, still smelling faintly of hospital disinfectant, and moved toward the front door. The house was preternaturally still. The lights were off downstairs. No soft music drifted from the speakers. No inviting aroma of a prepared meal wafted from the kitchen. Only one sign of life emanated from the top of the stairs. The master bedroom. He didn't call out. He didn't announce his arrival with a cheerful, "Honey, I'm home." Some ancient primal instinct, something deeper and more certain than mere suspicion, told him to be silent. He climbed the stairs slowly, each creak of the wooden steps sounding like a gunshot in the quiet house. He stopped outside their bedroom door. It was slightly ajar, casting a warm, distorted sliver of light into the dark hallway. He pushed the door open gently, a desperate, silent prayer forming in his mind. Please let it be empty. Please let her just be napping. But it wasn't empty. Cass was there. And so was a man he had never seen before. They were entangled in the bed he and Cass had chosen together 5 years ago, after testing nearly every model in the showroom. the one that she had complained was too firm for the first week before she admitted she'd never slept better. Her laughter, light, breathless, and utterly unfamiliar in its intimacy with a stranger, cut through him, sharper and more precise than any surgeon's scalpel. The sheets were twisted around them. His own pillow lay discarded on the floor. On the nightstand, their wedding photo sat tilted at a jarring angle, as if it unable to bear the sight of the scene it was forced to witness. He didn't move. He didn't gasp. He didn't make a sound. The world had narrowed to this single horrifying frame, and all the audio had been sucked out of it. His breathing was shallow, his eyes dry and unblinking. The pain wasn't the explosive, fiery rage he might have expected. It was a hollow, cavernous ache that started somewhere in the base of his spine and echoed emptily through his newly repaired heart. They didn't see him. Not yet. They were too lost in their stolen moment, too assured of their privacy, too certain he was still miles away, convalescing. 10 seconds passed. 20. Time lost all meaning, folding in on itself. Then, with a calm that felt alien even to himself, he stepped back. Slowly, carefully. No outburst, no drama. He walked down the stairs with the same measured, silent precision he had once used to navigate IED-laden roads during his tours overseas. He walked out the front door, back to the waiting cab, its engine still quietly rumbling. The driver glanced up at his pale-set face in the rearview mirror. "Everything all right, mate?" Leo's voice was low, stripped of all emotion, barely a whisper. "Drive."
"Where to?" "Just downtown." As the car pulled away from the curb, from the house that had just ceased to be his home, Leo Vance did not look back. He closed his eyes and let the silence wrap around him. But it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a betrayal so profound, so absolute, that words would only serve to cheapen it. This wasn't grief, not yet. This was the terrifying, unbearably still moment just before the storm breaks. The city blurred past the window, a smear of light and motion, but Leo's mind, flogged by pain medication and emotional shock just moments before, was now preternaturally clear. The physical ache in his chest was a minor nuisance, compared to the cold, quiet burn igniting in his soul. There was no screaming fury, no trembling rage. Instead, there was a deep, pulsing, and terrifying clarity. Seeing Cassandra Reed with that stranger hadn't shattered him. It had snapped something back into place. The woman in that bed was not the woman he had married. She was a carefully constructed illusion, and the facade had finally crumbled. She wasn't worth another second of his heartache, but that didn't mean she would simply walk away unscathed. She had chosen this path. He would simply ensure it was the last path available to her. "Take me to the financial district," he told the driver, his voice firmer now. "Corner of Grant and 4th. 20 minutes later, the cab pulled up in front of a discreet, polished granite building, tucked between two glittering corporate high-rises. Leo stepped out, his overnight bag still slung over his shoulder, the hospital bracelet, a stark white reminder of the vulnerability she had preyed upon, still clinging to his wrist. He didn't bother smoothing his rumpled hoodie or hiding the dark circles of exhaustion under his eyes. None of that mattered anymore. Not his appearance, not his image, only the outcome. Julian Croft had been his friend and confidant for over 15 years. They'd met in the awkward transition period after Leo's military discharge, when Julian was a hungry law student and Leo was picking up freelance IT security work to make ends meet. Julian was now one of the most ruthlessly effective corporate and divorce attorneys in the city, and he owed Leo more than a few favors, both personal and professional. When Leo walked into the corner office unannounced, Julian looked up from his massive oak desk, his expression shifting from professional focus to genuine alarm. "Leo, what in God's name are you doing here? You're supposed to be in a hospital bed." Leo closed the heavy office door with a soft, definitive click. Plans changed. Julian motioned to the plush leather chair opposite him. "What happened? Did they discharge you? Are you feeling all right?" Leo sat down without a word. He reached into his duffel bag, passed the change of clothes and the bottle of painkillers, and pulled out a thick, well-worn manila folder. He placed it on the polished surface of Julian's desk with a quiet, deliberate finality, like a soldier laying down a loaded weapon. "She's been cheating," he said, his voice flat, devoid of all affect. I walked in on them, in our bed, today. Julian blinked, his brow furrowing. Cass? With who? Some guy. I didn't get a name. I didn't need to. Leo's calm was unnerving, the kind of stillness that precedes a tornado. He tapped the folder once with his index finger. Everything you need is in there. Julian opened the folder, his eyes scanning the first page, then the next. His initial look of concern morphed into one of sheer disbelief, then into one of deep professional respect. It was a comprehensive dossier. Bank statements from multiple institutions, property deeds, signed trust documents, power of attorney forms, private account summaries, and a detailed chronological trail of financial restructuring that spanned nearly a year. You already moved everything? Julian said, his voice hushed with awe as he glanced up. Leo gave a single, slow nod. The house, the business, the investments, the savings, all transferred, consolidated, and locked down. She still thinks she has full access to all of it. She never bothered to check. Julian sat back in his chair, exhaling a long, low whistle through his teeth. She has no idea you prepared for this. She never bothered to notice, Leo repeated, his steel blue eyes fixed on a point somewhere past Julian on the city skyline. And now she's going to find out exactly what she never cared to understand. Julian kept scanning the documents, his fingers tracing over lines of text. You restructured your company into a blind trust last October, made yourself the sole beneficiary and managing director. She didn't even update her power of attorney after you got married.
No, Leo confirmed, a cold smile touching his lips for the first time. I made sure she didn't think she had to. She wanted the illusion of control. I gave it to her. And now? Julian asked, though he already knew the answer. Now I want the papers filed today. Divorce, full documentation of adultery and financial malfeasance. I want her served before she even figures out the bank accounts are frozen. Do you want me to petition for temporary restraining orders, asset freezing? Yes, and I want to flag the joint account. She's been siphoning money for months. A significant portion of that capital came from my VA disability benefits. That qualifies for federal review and felony charges. Jesus, Leo, Julian muttered, a look of grim admiration on his face. You're going full scorched earth. Leo stood up, his movements fluid and sure, belying the patient who had been in a hospital bed hours before. No, I'm not destroying anything. I'm preserving what's mine. He paused, his gaze locking on to Julian's. She made her choice in my bed. I'm just making sure she lives with the consequences of it. Julian picked up his phone, his demeanor shifting into that of a general preparing for battle. Give me 2 hours. Leo nodded. I'll be back. Keep everything confidential. He turned without another word and walked out of the office, stepping into the bright afternoon sun not like a man recovering from major surgery, but like a soldier rising from a battlefield, bloodied but far from beaten. It wasn't about revenge, not yet. It was the first calculated move on a chessboard Cass never even realized she was playing on. By the time the sun began to dip below the skyline, casting long, dramatic shadows across the city, the house Leo Vance had once called home was already undergoing a silent, methodical transformation. The warm, inviting space of shared memories was being systematically converted into a calculated fortress that no longer belonged to Cassandra Reed. The locksmith, a burly, silent man with a tool belt weighed down with metal and purpose, arrived within an hour of Leo's meeting with Julian. Leo didn't wait for formalities or court orders. He worked alongside the man, pointing to every door, every window with a lock. Every single one was replaced with a new, high-security deadbolt. The garage door opener was digitally reprogrammed, its old codes wiped from existence. The sophisticated home security system, once installed to Cass's exacting specifications, cameras she insisted on for her peace of mind, was completely reset. The passcode she had chosen, her birthday, was unceremoniously erased from the system. Leo called the monitoring company himself, his voice calm and authoritative as he had her listed as an unauthorized occupant. No notifications would be sent to her phone, no warnings. just silent, efficient exclusion. This wasn't a fit of pique. It was a clinical, step-by-step reclamation. He moved through the house with a detached efficiency, collecting the spare keys she had stashed in magnetic boxes under the deck and in fake rocks in the garden. He changed the codes on the digital lockbox the realtor had used. This was the unmaking of a life, performed not with shouts, but with the quiet clicks of new locks engaging. Next came the finances. The joint checking account, once a symbol of their shared life, was frozen within 10 minutes of his electronically signed request. With a few keystrokes from a secure laptop, Leo moved the remaining $48,500 into a private numbered account Cass had never known existed. He'd opened it over a year ago under a separate trust, quietly redirecting dividend payouts and his independent consulting income. The banker, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s named Mrs. Evans, barely blinked when Leo, via a secure video call, explained the need for immediate and total restriction of Cass's access. "She's been using the account like her personal trust fund," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "She hasn't checked the balance today, but she will." Mrs. Evans nodded, her expression of one of professional sympathy. "We see it more often than you'd think, Mr. Vance. You're not the first, but you might be the most prepared." "Not prepared," Leo corrected her softly. "Just done pretending."
After the banks, he made one final call, this one to the luxury dealership, where Cass's beloved Audi Q7 was leased. She loved to boast about it at her charity galas and ladies' lunches. "The leather seats are heated and cooled, darling, and the surround view cameras are a lifesaver in the city." Always speaking of it as if it were her own hard-earned prize. But the lease was, and had always been, in Leo's name. He had negotiated a unique buyback clause, a piece of foresight he'd attributed to estate planning at the time. Now, with a scanned copy of his driver's license and a digital signature, the dealership agreed to send a repossession team to collect the vehicle that same afternoon. No notice to her, no confrontation. It would simply be gone. By early evening, Leo stood across the street, not in his own car, but in the passenger seat of Julian's sleek, black Range Rover. He sipped a black coffee, its bitterness a fitting taste on his tongue, as he watched the final act of the day's drama begin to unfold. A rideshare car pulled up to the curb. Cass stepped out first, her laughter tinkling in the quiet evening air. She was followed closely by a man, tall, with the carefully styled hair and confident swagger of a mid-level finance bro. Ethan, Leo presumed. This was the stranger from his bed. They looked relaxed, confident, flush with the secret thrill of their affair. Cass reached into her designer purse, pulled out her key fob, and pressed it against the reader on the new smart lock. Nothing happened. A faint frown creased her perfectly Botoxed brow. She tried again, jabbing the button with a manicured finger. Nothing. Confusion quickly morphed into irritation. Ethan stepped forward, pulling a physical key from his pocket, a spare she had undoubtedly given him. He inserted it into the new, unfamiliar deadbolt. It didn't fit. He jiggled it uselessly. "Leo?" Cass called out, her voice tight. She knocked on the heavy wood. "Open the door! This isn't funny!" Inside the Range Rover, Leo didn't move a muscle. Julian handed him a fresh coffee. "You good?" he asked, his voice low. Leo nodded once, his eyes never leaving the scene. In control. Let her scream. Ethan's voice joined in, louder, more belligerent. "Hey man, come on, open up. Don't be a dick about this. We're not here to fight." Leo took another slow sip of his coffee. He didn't look angry. He didn't even look particularly interested. He looked finished. Cass's knocking became frantic pounding. The tone of her voice shifted from irritated entitlement to genuine, dawning panic. "Leo, please, my card was just declined at the restaurant. Something's wrong. Open the door." He could see her fumbling with her phone, her face illuminated by the screen, no doubt seeing the notifications from her bank app. Transaction declined. Account access restricted. Leo set the empty coffee cup down in the console. "Let's go." As the Range Rover pulled silently away from the curb, Leo allowed himself one last look in the side mirror. Cass had collapsed onto the front porch steps, her shoulders shaking with sobs of rage and confusion. Ethan stood off to the side, no longer posturing, his face lit by his own phone screen, probably trying to call another rideshare, utterly useless. He was undoubtedly discovering that his own cards were also being declined, a consequence of Leo tracing and flagging every account Cass had funneled their money into. Leo didn't smile. He didn't wave. He didn't feel a spark of gloating satisfaction. He simply watched. Then he turned forward, his eyes clear, his voice steady. Checkmate. There were no raised voices, no thrown objects, no dramatic tear-filled arguments. Just the quiet surgical removal of a cancerous presence from his life. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was reclamation. He was no longer the victim. He was holding the board, and he knew every move she didn't. The morning after the lockout, Leo Vance sat on the private balcony of a sleek downtown hotel suite, watching the city awaken. The sun rose clean and golden between the glass and steel canyons. People flowed along the sidewalks below, tiny ants consumed by their own routines, their own dramas. For the first time in days, he felt a profound nothingness. No searing sting of betrayal, no hollow ache of loss, just a cold, still calm that settled in once the initial shock of anger had been spent and only pure, unadulterated purpose remained.
His phone buzzed on the glass table beside him. Once. Then again. And again. 12 missed calls from Cassandra. 7 from a number he didn't recognize. Probably Ethan. A voicemail notification appeared. He didn't listen. He could already imagine the contents. Confusion laced with fury, tearful excuses, maybe a performance of feigned concern. None of it mattered. The script had been flipped. Instead, he opened his laptop, the one he kept secured behind multiple layers of encryption, a relic from his military IT days. He logged into the secure client portal Julian had set up for him. The digital battlefield was laid out before him with stunning clarity. The divorce papers had been filed first thing this morning, petitioning for dissolution on grounds of adultery and financial dissipation. Attached to the petition was a request for a temporary restraining order, supported not by hearsay, but by cold, hard digital evidence. Julian had already pulled the video footage from the home security system. Leo had reviewed the recordings himself in the early hours of the morning, his heart rate never elevating. She hadn't even bothered to close the blinds. The camera in the hallway, pointed toward the bedroom door, had captured it all. The time-stamped entry of Ethan, the sounds of laughter and the bed shifting, their exit hours later. The betrayal, rendered in high definition and time-coded for the court's convenience. The footage would be devastatingly effective in front of a judge, but its work was already done for Leo. It was the proof that sealed his own emotional detachment. Next, he reviewed the documents for the civil suit. Cass had withdrawn over $65,000 from their various joint accounts over the past 8 months. Money that Leo had quietly moved back and forth between accounts while preparing his financial exit strategy, creating a perfect, auditable paper trail. The fatal flaw, the detail that elevated this from a messy divorce to potential criminal territory, was that a significant portion of that money could be traced directly to his military disability benefits. VA funds were federally protected. Cass had either been ignorant of this fact or arrogantly believed it didn't apply to her. That mistake gave Leo the leverage to file for fraud and felony-level misappropriation. The choice was now hers: return the money and handle it civilly, or refuse and face federal charges. He was indifferent to the path she chose. The destination, her financial ruin, was the same. But he wasn't done. He opened another encrypted folder and opened an email draft he had been meticulously crafting since 3 a.m. It was addressed to the Title IX office and the Office of Academic Integrity at the prestigious private university where Cass worked part-time in development and alumni relations, and where Ethan Cole, he'd finally gotten the full name from Julian's investigator, held a tenured position in the business school. The message was a masterpiece of concise, formal accusation, backed not by emotion, but by irrefutable documentation. Screenshots of Cass's shared calendar entries showing personal appointments and off-site meetings that coincided perfectly with time-stamped receipts from restaurants and hotels near campus. Location data from her phone, pulled from a family plan backup she'd forgotten about, that placed her at Ethan's faculty office and his on-campus townhouse during her work hours. And most damningly, receipts for a weekend at a luxury inn charged to the joint account under the memo line E, weekend getaway. That little heart emoji. The implication was unambiguous. A tenured faculty member engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a university staffer, misusing university time and resources to facilitate the affair. It wasn't just a personal scandal, it was a direct violation of multiple university policies. He attached the evidence as an encrypted zip file and clicked Send. Less than 2 hours later, an automated response appeared in his inbox. Thank you for your report. This matter has been forwarded to the Office of Academic Integrity and Human Resources for immediate review. It was enough. He didn't need to witness the fallout firsthand. He just needed to know the first domino had been tipped. The institution's machinery, slow and ponderous but ultimately ruthless, was now in motion. Later that afternoon, a text came through from Cass. Leo, please, can we just talk? This is all a huge misunderstanding. Things have gotten so out of control. We never meant to hurt you like this. I almost laughed aloud. They never meant to hurt him. They just never thought he would be capable of fighting back. They had expected a broken man, too stunned and heartbroken to do nothing but weep and plead. Instead, they found themselves facing a silent, impenetrable wall of strategy. They were up against a man who understood that true, lasting damage isn't delivered in a shouted insult. It's administered with the quiet precision of a surgeon's knife, cut by calculated cut. Ethan Cole would soon be facing an internal investigation that threatened his career, his reputation, and his tenure. His name was now flagged in the financial discovery process. Cass had left a trail of breadcrumbs from their joint account to his personal Venmo and PayPal, transfers labeled for dinner, and your half of the rental fee. Amateur mistakes, easily traceable ones. Leo didn't need revenge in the classic sense. He needed accountability. He needed the truth. And the truth, when organized into affidavits, timestamps, and clear policy violations, spoke with a louder, more devastating voice than any confrontation ever could.
By nightfall, the storm was no longer a tempest raging inside him. He had successfully exported it. It was now raging in courtrooms, in HR departments, in university compliance offices, and in the hushed, panicked conversations between two people who thought their secret was safe. Leo simply sat in the silence of his hotel room, drinking black coffee and reading the final line of a follow-up email from the university's legal counsel. If the allegations are confirmed, disciplinary action may include immediate suspension and termination for all involved parties. That would do. The board was still moving, but the game was decisively, irrevocably no longer in their hands. The Sunday afternoon air in the exclusive Willow Creek Estates was heavy with a manufactured serenity. Manicured lawns stretched like green carpets, each mansion more imposing than the last. Leo Vance pulled his rented sedan into the circular driveway of the Reed residence, a sprawling Tudor revival behind a gated entrance. The hedges were sculpted with geometric precision, the fall mums were a too-perfect burst of orange and yellow, and the brass mailbox gleamed as if polished hourly. He stepped out of the car dressed in a simple, well-tailored dark button-down and slacks. He carried nothing but a single, slim, charcoal-gray folder under his arm. No entourage, no drama, just pure, unadulterated purpose. This was the home of Richard and Eleanor Reed, Cass's parents. For 12 years, they had offered him polite, chilly smiles that never warmed their eyes. Eleanor had once remarked to him at a Christmas party, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness, "We always imagined our Cass with a legacy. But you've certainly provided stability, Leo. One must be practical." The memory was no longer a wound, it was simply data. The grand oak door swung open before he could ring the bell. Cass stood there, dressed in expensive but rumpled yoga wear, her face devoid of its usual makeup. She paled, her hand flying to her throat the moment she saw him. "What are you doing here?" she breathed, her voice a mixture of shock and fear. Leo's voice was calm, even, and carried effortlessly in the still air. "I brought something for your parents." Eleanor appeared behind her daughter like a hawk spotting movement, her eyes sharp and immediately suspicious. "Well, well, the prodigal son returns. To what do we owe this surprise?" Her tone was laced with its usual venom. Leo didn't flinch. "May I come in?" Cass hesitated, but Eleanor tilted her head, a predator considering its prey. "By all means, let's hear what the man has to say." They led him into the opulent, cold living room where Richard sat in the leather wingback chair, pretending to read the Wall Street Journal. He didn't look up, a classic power play. Leo remained standing. 5 minutes, Cass muttered, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Less," Leo promised. He placed the folder on their immaculate glass coffee table, opening it with slow, deliberate movements. He pulled out the first document, a detailed, color-coded spreadsheet. "This," he said, his gaze fixed on Richard, who had finally lowered his newspaper, "details $65,412 in unauthorized withdrawals and transfers from our joint accounts over the past 8 months. His finger tapped a highlighted line. "This one, for $2,500, was sent to an Ethan Cole via Venmo. The memo reads, 'For our amazing weekend,' dated while I was in the hospital for my pre-op consultation." He let that hang in the air before setting down the next paper. It was a printout of the university's investigation confirmation email. "This is notification of an open investigation into Cass and Mr. Cole for inappropriate conduct and misuse of school resources. They used school time, school property, and her position to facilitate their affair." He slid the paper toward Eleanor. "It's been escalated. His tenure is under review." The third document made the silence in the room truly profound. It was a copy of the new deed to the house Cass had been locked out of. Leo pointed to the notarized signature. "The house was legally sold to a holding company 6 weeks ago. The buyer is a trusted associate of mine. He has leased it back to me under a private short-term agreement, which means every minute Cass spent in that house after I changed the locks, she was trespassing. The sheriff's eviction notice is being processed as we speak."
Eleanor's face, usually a mask of controlled superiority, twisted. This is lies. Bluffing. You're a vicious little man, Leo." Leo didn't bother to respond. He simply turned to the final document, placing it on the table with the gravity of a closing argument. A simple sheet from a mortgage services company. "This," he said, addressing Richard and Eleanor directly, "is a notice of foreclosure proceedings, scheduled to begin next month. For the past 2 years, I have been quietly covering the mortgage payments on this house. Your house. Richard's bad investments in 21 nearly cost you this place. I never said a word. My plan was to surprise you with the full payoff this December, as a Christmas gift." He gave a small, cold shrug. "But things change." The blood drained from Eleanor's face. Richard dropped the newspaper entirely, his hands trembling. Cass began to cry, soft, pathetic sobs. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," she whispered, a last desperate attempt at threat. Leo raised an eyebrow. "Good. Then she can explain to you that I am also filing to recover the misappropriated funds, and I've documented the misuse of my VA disability benefits. That's a federal felony, not a marital spat. A felony." He let that sink in.
For 12 years, I showed up. I worked. I protected your daughter. I gave her a life you could be proud of. I paid the bills. I defended her when no one else would. And in return, I came home from the hospital after heart surgery and found her in our bed with another man. He turned his icy gaze to Eleanor. And you encouraged her contempt. You never thought I was enough. So now, he said, gathering the folder and tucking it back under his arm, I'm finally living down to your expectations. As he walked to the door, the carefully constructed reed facade shattered completely behind him. Cass was pleading, her words incoherent. Eleanor was sobbing, great heaving gasps of humiliation. Richard was shouting, his voice cracking with impotent rage. Leo didn't turn around. He opened the heavy door himself, stepped out into the clean autumn air, and closed it softly behind him, shutting out the chaos. It wasn't revenge. It was justice, served not with fiery anger, but with ice-cold facts. Not with yelling, but with unassailable truth. He didn't need them to like him. He only needed them to understand, in their bones, that everything they had once looked down upon had now risen up and held them accountable. The silence that followed him down the driveway was louder than any confrontation could ever be. Weeks bled into months. Leo Vance didn't say a word. Not to Cass, not to her family, not to the few mutual friends who tried to probe for gossip. He didn't need to. The consequences he had set in motion began to unravel Cass's life with the grim, inevitable efficiency of a predetermined script. It began with the eviction. Cass had ignored the first notices, believing it was a bluff, a negotiating tactic from Leo. But when 2 county sheriff's deputies arrived, posted the official order on the grand front door, and gave her 72 hours to vacate, the reality hit her with the force of a physical blow. Neighbors watched from behind their pristine curtains as she packed her Louis Vuitton trunks into a rented moving van, her face a mask of tear-streaked humiliation. Ethan wasn't there to help. He was otherwise occupied. The university's internal machinery had ground into motion with startling speed. The Title IX report, backed by Leo's meticulously compiled evidence, was too concrete to ignore. Ethan Cole was suspended pending a full investigation. Within a week, the board voted to revoke his tenure, citing a profound breach of ethical conduct. His 6-figure salary, his prestigious position, his guaranteed pension, all evaporated overnight. And when screenshots of flirtatious emails sent from his university account to Cass's were leaked to the faculty senate, his professional reputation was annihilated. The final blow, however, came from an unexpected quarter. Sophia Cole, Ethan's wife of 20 years. She had been oblivious, living in the comfortable bubble of her husband's lies, until she received an anonymous manila envelope in the mail. Inside were printed photos of Cass and Ethan on their weekend getaway, copies of the Venmo transactions, and a particularly cruel text message Cass had sent to a friend. He says he feels so alive with me that she's just comfortable, dull.
Sophia filed for divorce the next day, and she, unlike Leo, was not quiet about it. She took to social media, not with vague posts, but with specific, damning details, painting a picture of a midlife crisis wrapped in a betrayal of epic proportions. Cass, now homeless and publicly disgraced, moved in with a former college roommate for a few weeks before being forced to take a 1-bedroom apartment in a building with noisy neighbors and stained carpeting, a far cry from her curated perfection. Then came the job. Her position at the university was eliminated due to restructuring. The only work she could find was a retail position at a high-end home goods store, the very type of place she used to lord over as a customer. Now she wore a mandated apron, stocked shelves, and ran a cash register, forced to smile at the very society women who had once been her peers. She tried to fight back the only way she knew how, with image. She took to social media, crafting a narrative of victimhood. She posted gauzy, filtered selfies with cryptic, tearful captions about narcissistic abuse, financial control, and finding her truth. For a brief moment, it worked. A chorus of supportive comments, heart emojis, and "You go, girl" messages flooded in. The illusion held until a single comment appeared under her most viral post. It was from a burner account with no profile picture. The comment was simple, devastating, and undeniable. "Isn't it curious how your truth always seems to leave out the part where you were fucking your husband's replacement in the marital bed while he was recovering from open heart surgery? Just wondering if that chapter is coming soon." The supportive chorus fell silent. Then came the questions, the demands for clarification. The comments turned from supportive to skeptical, then to outright hostile. Friends from the country club unfollowed her en masse. Her carefully constructed narrative of victimhood crumbled to dust in the span of an afternoon. Leo never replied again. He never came forward. He didn't give interviews or post his side of the story. His silence was his weapon, and it was far more powerful than any diatribe. He watched the entire spectacle from a distance, not with joy, but with the detached interest of a scientist observing a concluded experiment. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't even angry anymore. He was simply done. And Cass? She was finally, utterly alone. Not the loneliness of a temporary setback, but the profound existential isolation that comes when you realize you have burned every single bridge, exhausted every lie, and are now standing completely alone in the ashes of the life you destroyed. Leo never forgave her. He never said he would. But he didn't personally destroy her either. He simply held up a mirror and allowed her to face the consequences of her own choices. She did the rest all on her own. 1 year later, Leo Vance woke to the gentle, rhythmic sound of water lapping against the wooden dock outside.